So, my name's Mark. I use the pseudonym Sticks Online, and I run the MMO by YouTube channel, and I co-run the MMO by Twitch channel with my wife, Mrs. Sticks. I've been asked repeatedly since the inception of the channel to do a video dedicated specifically to my life, my history with the genre, the history of the channel, and that is, in essence, what I'm here to do today. And it is going to, by far, be what is arguably the most difficult video that I have ever had to do, because I am going to talk about topics here that I have never talked about with anyone on stream, in any video, or really people outside of my immediate family. Now, before we go any further, I do want to preface the entire video by stating that there may be topics that I discuss in here that may trigger some of you, so do be aware of that. Now, I guess let me introduce myself a little more personally. Again, my name is Mark. I am an Australian. My mother is Australian, my father is half Russian, half Chinese. I lived in Australia for the first 27 years of my life. I was born there, I was raised there, and I lived there until meeting Mrs. Sticks Online and coming over to America to be with her. Now, I grew up with pretty much nothing. I spent the majority of my childhood without a computer. I spent a lot of my childhood without a gaming console whatsoever. I mean, back when I was about 11 or 12, I actually drew myself a Game Boy Color, and then I made essentially a Game Boy Color out of cardboard, and I drew little slides of different video games that I would see in magazines, and I would pretend I was playing it. I know that that's kind of pathetic in retrospect, but that is how poor I was. We couldn't even afford to rent movies from our local video store, and that is partly due to the fact that my mother just did not really dedicate much time to work. She was a very lazy person, but she provided enough where we didn't live out on the street. Now, I only ever knew my father for, I think, probably the first 3 years of my life. When I was about 2, maybe 3 years old, my mother actually had my father put in jail. She had a restraining order put on him, and we, in essence, went into the Australian version of witness protection. And I kid you not, I spent the first probably about 11 years of my life moving around from town to town, from city to city, from state to state. I never stayed in a school longer than maybe 2 years at max. Therefore, I had a lot of issues making friends. We never really got to know anybody whatsoever. And that left me kind of pulling away from people, and in essence, I guess, kind of contributed to me becoming the introvert that I am, which, you know, really, you guys probably have no idea that I am, because I'm very loud, I'm very excitable and expressive. Now, I have a lot of siblings. I grew up with 4 of them. My older sister, Stephanie, my older sister, Marie, my older brother, David, and my younger sister, Jessica, who you guys know as Wiggy. Now, when I was about 5 years old, my mother, because Wiggy was not born at this time, but my mother, she was at a point where she didn't want to have to deal with her children. So my mother left me, who was 5 years old at the time, Stephanie and Marie, who were both 8, and David, who happened to be 10 at the time, with her grandparents. And this is where things get really, really fucked up. See, I was not planned, I guess. My mother, she got with my father purely out of spite of her parents. Her parents were very, very racist. They explicitly told her, you are never to get with a Chinese man. That is their one rule. You are forbidden from even dating someone of that ethnicity. And so she got with my father, she had me, and then she dumped me, for lack of a better word, and my siblings with her parents. To give you guys a couple of examples of how her parents, my grandparents, treated me. When I was 5 years old, my grandfather, he took a hot metal pole when he was out working in the yard, and he held it against my thigh, my left thigh, and to this day, I have a scar that goes probably 3, maybe 4 inches down my thigh, and probably about 2 inches wide, It's literally, it is about this long, about that thick, that goes all the way up my thigh. He did that to me just because he disliked me. I was in more pain than I had ever felt in my entire life, but I couldn't do anything about it because I was 5 years old and my mother abandoned me at my grandparents' place. Now, fast forward a couple months, I misbehaved one time, and what my grandfather did was he grabbed me, he stuck my head, physically placed my head under the tire of his truck, and then he turned his truck on and threatened to run my head over. That is the kind of childhood I had from about 5 to 6 years old. These are the kinds of experiences that I had to go through. And I will always hold that against my grandparents. I will always hold that against my mother for leaving me there, knowing full well the kind of people they were. Now, granted, she came back after about a year because she had just given birth to Wiggy with Wiggy's father. And let me tell you right now, her father was quite the winner. I was the only kid out of the 4 of us that wanted to go back with her. My older sister, Stephanie, wanted to, but they held her back, refused to let her leave with my mother. I ran to her because I didn't want to stay there another minute. God knows what they did to her, honestly. And then I thought that everything was gonna be okay because my mother was nowhere near that bad. And I assumed that, you know, this guy, his name was Vic, was going to be a better parental figure than my grandparents were. And oh boy, was I wrong. So, Wiggy's father was very, very abusive, physically abusive. Adding on to this was the fact that my mother was mentally and emotionally abusive. When I was about 6, maybe 7 years old, I misbehaved. My mother locked me outside at about 11 in the evening. She told me that she was calling someone to come and take me away because I had misbehaved, and she did not want to have to deal with that or me ever again. I sat there outside for hours bawling my eyes out because I could not believe, I couldn't fathom or process the fact that I was essentially being given away for making a small mistake as a little kid. But I'll go deeper into the types of emotional manipulation and abuse that my mother put me through later in this video. Wiggy's father. He was actually, and I am not making this up, Wiggy's father was put in jail for murder. That is the kind of winner my mother picks. So, this guy, we visited him repeatedly while he was in jail over a multi-year period. He got out of jail, and at that point, we realized that he was very abusive. He used to hit me, and he used to hit me hard. He never hit my mother, he never hit my sister Wiggy, but he was incredibly abusive to me. He would leave bruises, he would leave red marks. He wouldn't only use his hands, he would use belts, he would use tools from around the house. And I, again, was at a point in my life where I could not do anything about it. So I just sucked it up. And you know what? That is pretty much the reason that I got into video games, and that led me to not only the MMO genre, but also the creation of the channel. See, back when I was about 8, I think maybe 9 years old, I'd saved up enough money from doing favors for our neighbors, mowing the yard, helping move things, and I purchased my very first PlayStation 1. I remember the first game I got for it, Resident Evil 1. I was absolutely terrified. I think I skipped school the next day because I couldn't sleep with how terrified I was after playing that game. But I purchased a PS1 because I was at a point in my life where I just needed both the physical and mental escape. I couldn't deal with the abuse, so I channeled what little I could into enjoying myself in a world that wasn't my own. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. So I spent years working at literally 8, 9 years old so I could afford to buy games, so I could play those games and escape the terrible situation that I was in as a child. And that is never a situation that any child should ever have to be put in. And I played my PlayStation probably more than anything else until one day, Wiggy's father, who happened to have a brother that was very, very into gaming, wanted to play some of the games that I had purchased on my PlayStation 1. So it was at this point that I got into an argument with her father. He's 30 years old. I'm about 9. He tells me he's going to take my PlayStation to his brother's place so they can play video games together. I tell him, that is my PlayStation, they are my games. I want to play it after school, and I have every intention on doing so. So, you know where he took this? I bet you guys can only imagine what happens next. I'm kidding. I bet you guys have no idea. But he physically grabs my PlayStation. My response to this is I run over, I try and grab the PlayStation and hold it against my chest because that was my PlayStation. I was not gonna let him take that without a fight. So what does he do? He grabs me by my throat and pins me to the ground. With his other arm, rips the PlayStation from my arms. And then he turns around, starts walking away. I get up, I run over and try to grab it. He grabs me and throws me across the room onto the couch. And yeah, that was about as good a fight as I was capable of putting up at that point. Shortly after, I happened to actually break him and my mother up. I'm not really going to go into detail as to how I went about doing that, but nevertheless, I broke the two of them up. And it was at that point that we moved into some really cheap little unit because we really couldn't afford anything. My mother worked a 9-to-5 job, but she was making literally minimum wage. So what happened was I would have to take days off of school to look after Wiggy. I would walk Wiggy to daycare. I would study for school. I would clean the house. I would cook the dinners. I would wash the dishes. I was a parent for the majority of the day. I did everything except for work. Although I guess you could say that everything I did was a form of work, because looking after her, raising her and myself, and trying to study for school was in essence a full-time job. To give you an example though of how poor we were at that time, we could not afford cooking utensils. We could not afford plates. We could not afford anything. I spent almost every single day making pasta, and that pasta I would make in one little pan that we had. I would then put it into a bucket. We would sit around the bucket, the three of us, and we would all eat spaghetti out of the bucket. After we were done, I would toss that out. Then I would wash the dishes, what dishes we'd made, the pan, some of the knives and forks, and some of the cups we had, in the same bucket because we couldn't afford anything else. I would also wash our clothes in that bucket. Literally, that bucket was used for everything. Just thinking back to these moments frustrates me so much. But at the same time, these experiences went on to mold me into the hardworking person that I have essentially become. Now, fast forward to, I think I was about 13 years old. I was in 10th grade at the time. I was that young because I had actually skipped a year in school, and my birthday is in December, which is at the end of the year. So I was always literally a year younger than everyone else. So I was in 10th grade. My mother turns to me one day and goes, "Mark, you have to get a job." And again, I'm 13 years old. I'm like, how am I supposed to get a job? They won't hire anyone unless they're 15 years old minimum. And she goes, "I don't know. I don't want to work anymore. You have to do something about this. If you do not get a job and you do not support your family, both Jessica and I, we are going to be kicked out and we're going to live on the street." This is what you tell your 13-year-old son who's studying to become a biologist, because that was my passion when I was a kid. I wanted to become a biologist. And so the next day I learned that she has pulled me out of school, and I was completely baffled. I had no idea why. Granted, you know, I feel like most kids don't like school, but I never wanted to be like forcibly ripped out of it. But there I was. My mother had saved up, I think, about $1,000 at that point, and she spent about $500 of that to pay our neighbor to build us a very, very weak but operable computer. So there I was, 13 years old, with this weak ass little computer, absolutely no knowledge of how I was going to make money, But my mother turns to me and says, if other people can make money online, so can you. And I said, but they probably have experience with it. And these words I will never forget. This was probably the biggest form of manipulation that she had ever used on me. But she turns to me and she goes, if you do not make money online and we end up on the street, both your sister and I are going to have to sell our bodies for money. I had been at that point looking after my sister for 8, maybe 9 years. She was still a kid, and I lost my shit. Like, the fact that she would threaten my sister like that was just inconceivable to me. But you know what? I did not put it past her. I knew the kind of messed up human being she was. So I joined multiple webmaster forums like Digital Point or Warrior Forum or various types of webmaster forums like that. Now, the things I did were things like forum posting, where I would create threads on forums or on topics they wanted. I would write posts that were done by anonymous users to try and fake interaction on their forums. I would do small little graphical alterations, general graphic design. I did a lot of article writing because I have fairly decent English. That was one of the classes that I absolutely excelled at in school. And this ultimately got me into web design, coding, and search engine optimization, SEO, which was my career of choice for quite a few years. And that kind of led me into the whole YouTube thing. Now, let's see, I was about 14, maybe 15 years old, and I'd gotten to a point where I was making about $1,000, maybe $1,200 a month, purely off of all of my efforts online. And my mother pocketed every single cent of it. I made nothing. I kept nothing. All of that money went directly into her bank account. She controlled all of it. And I know some of you might look at me and think to yourself, why would you let her do that? But for the next entire decade, as I continued to move up the ladder, as I continued to improve in my skill set and ultimately make more money, she would continue to pocket all of it. She would continue to purchase more extravagant things, to buy more expensive foods, just find new ways, new avenues of wasting that money that I worked so hard to make. But at around 15 years old, I was working probably 14, maybe 16 hours per day. That was to make about $1,000 a month. And I was just so mentally unstable at the time. And I was just looking once again to find something to lose myself in. And video games were not possible at the time because we did not have enough money for me to purchase anything, and I had no other source of income. So I looked online for online games that were free, and that led me to my very first MMORPG, Tales of Pirates. That was my introduction into the MMO genre, and that essentially helped shape my life. That was a game that I have never experienced. I got to play it with hundreds of other people. I joined a guild. I participated in PvP. I got to do dungeons. I got to do raids. Like, this was, I was a part of something so large, a community that was just so open, so welcoming, granted toxic at times because it was a PvP MMO, but it was essentially a family that I never had, and that is what my guild had become at the time. Granted, at the same time, that was probably one of the worst experiences of my life, because at 15, I had my I know I've talked about this on stream before, but at 15 I had my second girlfriend. Her name was Stacy. There was this girl in game. She would follow me around. She was part of my guild, so she could tell what city I was in. So she would go to the city I was in, that I was AFK in, and you have to stay AFK logged in so your pet could level. So I would AFK somewhere for hours or over the course of the entire day. And this girl would find me in the town and she would sit next to me. And like, I didn't see anything harmful with that. It didn't really bother me. But my girlfriend one day, she came over and she sees me sitting with this girl and she's like, what are you doing? Why are you sitting with another girl in the game? And I look at her and I'm like, I wasn't. I sat there completely by myself. I have no idea why she's there. And she looks at me and she's like, So she comes over another day and she sees it again. And she's like, why are you always sitting with her? And I tell her, I'm not. I swear to God. So I show her, I move my character somewhere completely on the other side of the city. And she sees me doing this. We go upstairs for a while. We come back down for a bit. And then she comes over to me and she asks me why I'm sitting next to this girl for the third time. I look at her and I tell her, you were there when I moved my character. I have no idea why this girl keeps sitting next to me, but I mean, I have no control over it other than I guess like verbally telling her not to. But she was upset, and I can kind of understand why, I guess, if there were in fact something going on, but there wasn't. Now, I went upstairs, and then later on I came down and I noticed that my character had no gear on and nothing at all. And apparently that is because she had destroyed everything. She had discarded all of my gear that I had spent a year and a half working on. She had destroyed my pet, tossed away all my money, everything, and I had nothing. And her reasoning for this was because she didn't trust that I wasn't doing things with this girl behind her back in an online game, even though she saw me move my character. And at that point, like, she broke my trust in a way that I never thought was possible to break. And that was pretty much the last time I ever let anyone near my character or on my character like that, or to have access to my character like that. Now, between the age of 13 and 26 years old, I began pursuing SEO really hard because I had gotten really good at it. Which actually, let me quickly segue a little bit, I guess, into my accent and why my accent is no longer Australian. When I was first getting into SEO, there was this American, there was this British guy, and me, the Australian. We were all trying to get the same job, and I had a difference of opinion to them. My opinion was right. I'm just gonna say this now because I ended up getting hired, but my opinion was right. However, the American goes to our potential client, don't listen to him, he's just a stupid Australian. And then the British guy goes, oh yeah, man, Australians, dude, yeah, totally, just absolutely ridiculously stupid. And then the client goes, oh, okay, yeah, sure, no, I completely understand. And it was at that moment where I thought to myself, wait, is there some stigma around being an Australian? Some kind of misconception that we're really stupid or something? So, you know what I did? I actually went back to him with a fake American accent and I said, I'm not Australian, I am American. And he goes to me, oh, well then, that makes all the difference. And then I got the job. So, if being an Australian and having an Australian accent was going to actually inhibit my ability to work and to get future jobs, then I would just pretend to not be one. I would just tell people that I'm an American living in Australia. And then the accent kind of just stuck. I faked it for so long that this just became my natural accent. Now, once again, between the age of 13 to 26, I actually got really good at SEO. So good that I was actually making about 5 digits per month by the time I was about 25, maybe 26 years old. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I did not keep a cent of it until I was about 20, almost 27 years old. And that is roughly when I met Mrs. Sticks and when I had started the YouTube channel. At that point, when I was about 27 years old, I quit doing SEO because it was just draining me so much. I worked at this for probably about 18 hours a day, 7 days a week to make that kind of return. And I decided it just was not for me. So I quit SEO. I quit making 5 digits per month because I wanted to pursue something that I just had a passion for more. And that was YouTube and video games. And I would urge you guys not to make the same decision that I did because it's a 1 in a million. And you require a lot of luck, determination, dedication and passion to really make this work. But you know what? Here I am today. Here you guys are today, regardless of what happened and what led me to get here. Here I am. Now, the reason I actually chose to make the channel, specifically an MMO channel, was because I used to watch a lot of Omer videos from MMO Hut. I know a lot of you know who he is. He's essentially the grandfather of the first impression MMO genre. And I looked at the kind of videos he was doing, and I thought to myself, you know what? If he can do it, what's preventing other people from doing it, right? And you know, I might actually be able to add a little something extra spicy, you know? And so I made MMO Byte, and my first videos on the channel were absolutely atrocious. I don't know how we gained any. Okay, I do know how we gained traction. That leads me to what happened at the beginning of our YouTube channel. And so I'm not necessarily proud of how we went about growing. See, initially, I did gameplay videos of MMOs, and I thought I was hot stuff. I thought, you know what, this is hilarious, the kinds of things that happened in the game, and they really weren't. But what I would do is I would compile a list of events that transpired in the game over maybe like an hour recording session, and then I would upload it, I would post it, I would go on over to Reddit, the dedicated subreddit for each MMO. So I would go to the Black Desert subreddit, I would go to the Guild Wars 2 subreddit, I would go to the Final Fantasy 14 subreddits, and I would always post my video there in hopes of acquiring new viewers, because if you're doing YouTube, like, you want people to see the kinds of content you're pushing out. It makes sense that the purpose behind pursuing a career in YouTube or even on social media is to get the attention of new viewers. So, you know, I went into this with probably the wrong intentions initially, and because I did kind of spam Reddit and I did make very cringy low effort videos, we garnered some hate. And you know what, at the end of the day, I completely understand that, and I understand people hating us because of that. But at the same time, we have come a long way since then. I don't do those cringy, well, I mean, I guess I still kind of do the odd cringy video here and there. This video is probably one of them, but we have come a long way in terms of the type of content that we do. We have definitely made a lot of bad mistakes. We've done plenty of bad videos where we've judged games before having really played them, you know, dedicating maybe a couple hours to them only, but then I feel like a lot of MMO creators make that same mistake. And then we've accepted some bad sponsors, and you know, that mistake is very easy to make, because if you're new to the whole being sponsored by companies thing, you're going to accept the wrong sponsors for the wrong reasons, especially when they're offering you a sizable chunk of money, and especially when you really need it. Let me tell you, while I turn down literally over 100 different sponsors per month now, if I was given the opportunities that I have today, back when I was only making about $500 off of the channel, I probably would have taken them. I feel like a lot of you guys would have too. And I mean, to date, I still do the odd bad YouTube video where I make a judgment about a game before necessarily playing it deeply enough or thoroughly enough. I might have an opinion on an upcoming game or an older game that you might not share, and therefore we have some type of disagreement, or people just genuinely don't like the opinion that I have. But at the end of the day, that makes sense, and that is why you follow multiple different people, because they have multiple different opinions. But I'm veering off track a little bit here. I've made plenty of mistakes over the course of my life. I have suffered a lot of abuse over the course of my life. I've grown a very hard shell over the years. I don't really let what people say necessarily get to me. I don't really care what people say. I just speak my mind about any topic, about any game I want. I'm pretty much completely unfiltered. That isn't always a good thing necessarily, but at the end of the day, that is who I am, and that is the kind of person I was molded into based off of the experiences that I had. But just because I have that hard shell does not mean that it is acceptable to treat people poorly, to hate without reason, to falsely spread misinformation about a person purely to have other people attack them. As an example here, people attacked Mrs. Sticks recently in Swords of Legends Online. They DM'd her that she should go kill herself. That is not acceptable. What kind of fucked up mental state do you have to be in to wish someone killed himself? I kid you not. There is a reason why contraception was invented. Those kinds of comments make me wish more people would use them. But she was told that she should kill herself because we do quote unquote fake giveaways. Yet there are thousands of people online that can attest to having received beta keys, alpha keys, and full versions of games that we have given away. You can find these either on Twitter or on Discord or even in the comment section below. They claim that we spread misinformation, and unfortunately, that is bound to happen. Sometimes you get info wrong. Sometimes information changes. Unfortunately, there is absolutely nothing you can do about that. You can try and get as much information correct as you can, and that is it. Now, I'm not going to attempt to defend clickbait. Clickbait is pretty much used all over YouTube. So many YouTubers use it. It's part of what is necessary to grow. We actually had somebody make a Reddit thread saying that I am abusive to her purely because I didn't hear her in a Swords of Legends Online stream one time, because I have noise canceling headphones on and she's on the other side of the room and I couldn't hear her, so they're claiming that I'm abusive towards her. Like, these kinds of things that are just fabricated and spread online are not only damaging to people, but damaging to their psyche, and are only going to create additional toxicity, negativity, and hate towards them. And these kinds of comments are just not necessary. And I know this is going to be a very controversial opinion here, but we as human beings have the ability to not watch videos from content creators we do not like, and we possess the ability to not falsely spread misinformation purely because you dislike the person's opinion. And lastly, we have the ability to be genuinely decent human beings. I know some of you can't, but everyone nevertheless possesses the ability to be one. And I guess that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today. I addressed my abuse, or at least multiple aspects of my abuse. I didn't want to go too deeply into every type of abuse I've suffered. Maybe one day I will. I don't know. Hopefully this gives you a little bit more of an idea of my origins, the origins of the channel. I mean, I would go into detail as to how Mrs. Sticks and I met, but I've covered that in a video in the past. I think the video was titled How Terra Changed My Life, and I detailed how we met and how Terra was the game that essentially took me from being single to having Mrs. Sticks as my life partner. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, I feel like I've covered quite a bit today, and that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. So this was a really long video. I'm sure you guys probably closed out of it in like the first minute because you're like, yeah, I don't want to hear any of this. I really don't care. I just want MMO news. So yeah, kudos for those of you that stayed around. And I genuinely hope none of you have ever had to go through any of what I've had to go through. And I hope none of you ever do.